So, welcome to We Need to Talk About Canada, Part 2. If you haven't seen the first part of this series yet, I strongly recommend you do so. It lays out the foundational knowledge that you're going to need in order to follow along with the rest of this series. And it lays out the knowledge you're going to need in order to get yourselves to the final endpoint, which will fully show you what Canada is as a governing body, we'll say. So, go watch the first video if you haven't already. For those of you who have and are ready to start in the next discussion, a very quick recap, just to make sure we're all on the same page. We came to two major consequences in the first video. So we started off by looking at the Hudson Bay Charter of 1670. This created a corporation that was essentially granted permission to run a country. Then the BNA Act of 1867, which created our Dominion, and the Rupert's Land Act of 1868, which demanded and accepted the surrender of the Hudson Bay Charter. We then looked at the Statute Law Revisions Act of 1893, which repealed the BNA Act. Namely, it repealed the enacting clause, and it repealed Section 2, the provisions clause. So that got us to consequence 1, which was that the BNA Act had lost its authority in 1893. We then looked at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms from 1982. This was a constitutional fix for the aforementioned issue we just discussed. And because of consequence 1, Trudeau needed the Queen in order to enact his charter. So she came and gave a proclamation. But in her proclamation, she stated twice that Section 59 of the charter had to be satisfied before the charter could take effect. We also saw that after she told you this twice in her proclamation, the very next paragraph was, "Of all which are loving subjects and all others whom these presents may concern are hereby required to take notice and to govern themselves accordingly." So Section 59 of our charter had to be satisfied before the Queen's proclamation would take effect and grant it legal authority. And Section 59 hasn't been satisfied to this day, which brought us to consequence 2. Our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada has not yet taken effect, taken force. It has not been granted a legal authority yet. That's why I need you to watch the first video in detail, because the first video has all of the documents I referenced from the government's own website linked in the description. And there's no conjecture to the story, it's read from bills. So now I want to take you back to the Interpretations Act of 1889. This was an act passed through the UK Parliament to deal with the status of the reigning British Empire, some of the colonies, dominions, and whatever. It dealt with Ireland, New Zealand, I believe Australia as well, Canada, Newfoundland, because as you should know, Newfoundland was not part of the Canadian Union and did not join until 1949. So, this Interpretations Act of 1889, the first thing that I want to tell you is that it defines Canada as a colony. You can find this in Section 18, subsection 2, and subsection 3. Canada is defined as a colony in this act. And this act passed through UK Parliament years after the BNA Act had been passed. But we're still being defined as a colony. As a side note, something you may want to start looking into on your own, but I will end up touching on in a video in the future. Person which I had always taken to be the same thing as individual or human or singular of people, we'll say, person is defined as a body corporate in the Interpretations Act. So you can find that in section 2, subsection 1 and subsection 2. So the consequence of this that is pertinent to this video is that as of 1889, in accordance with the Interpretations Act, Canada is legally defined as a colony, which is a British possession. Now we're going to move forward about 40 odd years. We're going to get to the Statute of Westminster, 1931. For the purpose of this video, we're only looking at section 11. Some sections in this Statute of Westminster only deal with specific bodies of land, so they're irrelevant to Canada going forward. But certain sections apply to all, and certain sections apply to only Canada. So for this video, we're only going to be dealing with section 11. Notwithstanding anything in the Interpretations Act 1889, the expression colony shall not, in any act of Parliament of the United Kingdom passed after the commencement of this act, include a dominion or any province or state forming a part of a dominion. So this was removing the status of colony for Canada as well as her provinces. This is very important. Include a dominion or any province or state forming part of a dominion. So they are no longer being referred to as colony or a British possession. Now, it takes a bit of looking to see the definitions of what they refer to. And if you are not a colony of the British Empire anymore, you are a sovereign state. There is no intermittent state between being a colony and being a sovereign state. And you need to understand what those words mean, what sovereign means, what state means, what citizen means, and how one is above the other. Sovereign is above citizen, always. Think of the Queen. She is the sovereign. She stands above her citizens, her subjects. So the consequence of this is that Canada's provinces were granted sovereignty in 1931 through Section 11 of the Statute of Westminster, 1913. All of the links will be posted below to the acts that I've referenced, as it was with the first video. I really want this to be something that you guys start really looking into. Start reading it on your own, figuring it out, because it has real life implications so long as you stop consenting to the fraudulent system that has been put in place. It is a de facto government. Ever since 1931, specifically, it has been, though there are other implications prior to that, given the BNA Act had its enacting clause repealed in 1893. So, read the bills. Ideally, you're reading along with these bills as I'm talking with you. The Interpretations Act said we're a colony in 1889. And then in 1931, it was clarified that we will no longer be referred to as a colony going forward. And if we are not a colony, we are sovereign. Include a dominion or any province or state forming part of a dominion. Each province in Canada is part of forming a dominion. So every province was granted the opportunity and legal right to start sitting their own de jure governments in 1931, after the commencement of this act. Through non-action, consent, and acceptance, the essential status quo has remained. But the legal authority to be able to act against them is there if it is done properly. If it is not, you will find yourself in jail. This is why education is important. Thank you for listening to part 2, and I hope you come along for the ride as I continue this journey. Cheers.